welcome to the PodcAls. I'm Joey Alfieri with you again on this lovely week. It's officially spring-ish, I guess, out there, which means we're one step closer to football season, which means we're one step closer to Montreal Alouettes and CFL training camps. Opening training camp we're looking at less than 2 months away. I believe the main camp gets going. It should get going on May the 12th. And yeah, we're getting close. The draft is coming up as well. I know that it's Combine Week over in Winnipeg. So that'll be a lot of fun to follow the prospects. So there's a lot of things going on in the world of the Canadian Football League. So interesting times are ahead. The Alouettes will add to their Canadian content, which is always important. And if you look at the way that they're built, you know that the players that they've drafted over the last couple of years have really played an integral part in the team winning a Grey Cup championship. So really excited, really happy to be with you, and really close to football season. And football season, well, that's what we're here for, right? We're here to win games and to have some fun. And just a reminder before we jump into this episode, because we do have a busy episode, I'll remind you that 3, 5, Flex 10, and season memberships are all available. GoAlsGo.com to pick that up as soon as possible. The 3 and 5 game packs are very simple to understand. You can pick your games right now. The Flex 10, you get 10 tickets that you can use anytime you want, any game. Obviously based on availability, of course, but if you want to use 10 tickets in one game, you can use them all. If you want to use 5 tickets one game, 5 tickets to another game, you can do that too. So the Alouettes very flexible and willing and ready to work around your schedule. So that'll be a lot of fun to see you at Percival Molson Stadium. First game is June the 6th, but that's away. That's in Winnipeg. But the first game at home is Thursday, June 20th, banner night against the Ottawa Red Blacks, who the Alouettes beat 4 times last year, including the home opener last year too. They won 19-12. So that was fun. And it should be very enjoyable for Alouettes Nation at the stadium again in 2024. All right. We've got a lot to get to on the show. We're going to talk to Montreal Alouettes receivers coach Mike Lionello. That'll be a good chat. The coaches were in Montreal all together this past week. They were meeting and they were basically breaking down tape, and we'll get into all that with Mike Lionello. And I know a lot of people have asked me about the status of Reggie White Jr., who missed all of last year with a knee injury. He's been out since 2 Octobers ago. So he looked healthy towards the end of last season, looked good in practice, and it'll be very nice to see him in training camp. We'll ask Mike about him and the way he looks and what the expectations are. How do you replace Austin Mack? We'll ask Mike Lionello those questions. But I want to take the opportunity, we're talking about Canadian talent and the importance of Canadian talent. And I thought it was important that we would look at the guys, the players that the Montreal Alouettes, the rights that they have on players in the NFL. I know that there's a negotiation list where, you can exclusively negotiate with certain players, but owning somebody's rights is a little different. So there are 6 players that are currently in the NFL that are signed to NFL contracts that belong to the Montreal Alouettes. And before we talk to Mike Lionello, I actually just wanted to go through those players, because if you're an Als fan, you might not be aware of who those guys are, and they might never come play in Canada. They never might come play in Montreal, but there's a possibility that they arrive at some point in the next year, 2, 3, 4, 5, never. I don't know, but I just wanted to run through that list just to kind of educate Alouettes fans on who is in the pipeline, who you can keep an eye on in NFL training camps. And so I think very obviously the ones that everyone knows and is familiar with, we'll get them out of the way. They've been guests on the podcast here over the last couple of weeks, is Austin Mack and Luol Uguak. Very different paths to the CFL, very different paths to the NFL. But Austin Mack signing a deal with the Atlanta Falcons, and then you had Luol Uguak, who signed a deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Both guys have an opportunity to stick on practice roster or to make the main roster. But they both are signed to NFL contracts. So Those two guys, I think everybody knows them. Ugwak is a Canadian, was drafted seventh overall last year. The Alouettes got a lot out of him. He took over that starting role. I want to say it was, late September, early October, and he ran with it and he became an impact starter right away. So now it's going to be about finding another Luol Ugwak in the draft who can step in. Maybe it's a different position, maybe it's the same position, but stepping in and finding a guy that can make that difference. So he's one guy. Austin Mack obviously came from the NFL, came to Montreal, had an unbelievable season, was unbelievable in the Grey Cup, and I signed with the Atlanta Falcons, like we said. So just from a contract status, because I get these questions all the time. So Austin Mack, if he were to be cut by Atlanta, for argument's sake, uh, his rights would be owned by the Alouettes until the end of the season. He had 1 year left on his contract in Montreal. So if he wanted to come back and play in Canada in 2024, he would have to do that in Montreal. After that, once next February hits, he would be a free agent. But I think if you listen to the podcast from a couple of weeks ago, I think Austin Mack, if it doesn't work out in the NFL, pretty much said that this is where he wants to be. It's Montreal. So that's pretty clear. When players are drafted into the CFL in the Canadian college draft, they typically sign 2 year contracts plus an option, which means that Luol Ugwak would be under team control for 3 years. We just played one season. So there's 2 years left on Ugwak's deal. So if he doesn't end up making the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he would come back to the Alouettes this year and next year. He would be under contract before becoming a free agent. So the Alouettes would have Luol Ugwak under team control until 2025 or through 2025. So the 2024-2025 seasons, he would be under team control. Does that mean, it doesn't mean he has to come back and, he can wait it out and wait for another NFL opportunity. Austin Mack could do the same thing. But if they wanted to come play, both guys seem pretty motivated to come back to Montreal. I think they both loved it here if it doesn't work out in the NFL. And we're rooting for them to make it in the NFL. But I think both guys would very much welcome a return to the Canadian Football League in Montreal in particular. So that's how that works. Now, the other guys that are under team control, Jonathan Sutherland, I guess he's a Sam linebacker, defensive back, safety from Penn State. Very good player. Was drafted 2 spots ahead of Luol Ugwak, so you know how strongly the Alouettes felt about him when they took him. Was a team captain at Penn State. Had a really good training camp with the Seattle Seahawks last year, but got injured. Ended up getting waived with an injury settlement, and was basically rehabbing on his own. Wasn't under contract to any team until the end of the year when the Seattle Seahawks decided they felt strongly enough about it to bring him back. So he'll have the opportunity to go back to training camp with Seattle and earn a spot on the team or on the practice roster. Really good player. Is a guy that could play Sam linebacker, which is the spot that Reggie Stubblefield plays right now. Could maybe back up at safety, can play a little DB, but he's a character guy. And it's funny, like with Jonathan Sutherland, he did something that I'd never seen before. Was signed by Seattle before the CFL draft. And once Montreal took him, he's an Ottawa guy. And once Montreal took him, he felt it was important to come to Montreal, to come to Olympic Stadium, to meet the media, to come into the locker room, meet some of the players that were around. I mean, that's really cool to me. Usually guys that are signed to the NFL, it's like, hey, when we get to Canada, when I get cut and I get to Canada, that's when I'll worry about it. But this guy is all class. Made the drive down from Ottawa to meet a CFL team that he potentially might never play for. So I thought that was really cool on his part. I thought, you could tell why. You could tell he was a classy guy, and you can tell why they made him captain at Penn State. He was really, really a sharp dude, a really good football player. And look, I'm hoping that we see him in Montreal. Part of me hopes that he makes it to the NFL and that we never see him. So I'm kind of torn. But yeah, I think that he would be a huge get for the Alouettes if ever he came to town. But again, he could be a difference maker when it comes to Canadians in the CFL. but he definitely has an opportunity. Clearly, Seattle liked something that they saw from him. Now it'll be interesting to see. Management in Seattle has stayed the same, but they have made a coaching change. Pete Carroll is no longer there anymore, and so we'll see if the new coach Mike McDonald is going to be able, feels the same way or feels differently. I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see if Mike McDonald is all in. And look, I think I remember paying attention to Seattle Seahawks training camp a little bit, and I just know that for an undrafted rookie, they used him a lot. They felt very comfortable with Jonathan Sutherland. So, I anticipate that he's going to have another really good camp. So, yeah, I think that would be a huge get for the Alouettes, but there's no guarantee that that's going to happen just yet. So that's three. You've got Ugwak, you got Mack, you got Sutherland, and the next one is Chase Brown, a Canadian running back out of Illinois, guy from London, Ontario. His brother Sidney was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles. Chase Brown ended up being drafted by the Alouettes last year in the 7th round with the 59th pick. And the only reason he was probably, one of the top two players in the draft. But the only reason he fell that late is because he was an NFL draft pick. He was a 5th round pick of the Cincinnati Bengals. Played this year, played some games for the Bengals, and scored. I remember he scored a touchdown on a pass from Jake Browning. I want to say that was against the Indianapolis Colts. It was later on ish in the season, but really showed his explosiveness. He's a guy that you roll the dice on in the 7th round because if he ends up coming, you've hit a home run. If he doesn't end up coming, well, it's not to say that you can't find good players in the 7th round, but I think he's worth the gamble at that point. So the Alouettes had most of their draft picks, and they had a pick, I want to say, in every round. I mean, they had 2 picks in the 2nd round. No, sorry, 2 picks in the 1st round. So, they had that extra pick there early. And so they took a chance on Sutherland, who was signed to an NFL team. This one is a longer shot on paper anyway, just because if Sutherland was undrafted, Chase Brown was drafted. And so you know that the draft picks will typically get a longer look than the undrafted guys. So I don't know if Chase Brown is ever going to show up. If he does, I mean, that's a guy who might be one of the best backs in the league when he gets here. Did very well south of the border in college and won the John Cornish Trophy as the best running back, a Canadian running back in college football. So very accomplished player. In the NFL, I mean, they let Joe Mixon walk, the Bengals did, so maybe that opens up a bigger opportunity for him. But I think it would be nuts if Chase Brown was able to ever come to Canada. I don't know. Right as of right now, with the way they utilized him in his first season, it's not like he played a ton on offense, but he definitely did get a look. And I think if he comes to Montreal, I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. I think it might be a couple of years. Yeah, so that's the 4th player is Chase Brown, who belongs to the Montreal Alouettes. And looking at the 5th player whose rights the Alouettes hold, NFL player whose rights the Alouettes hold, we have to go over to the global draft because the next 2 players are global draft picks, and they both came in 2002. The first overall pick in the global draft in 2022, sorry, by the Montreal Alouettes was Kingsley Jonathan, a defensive end out of Syracuse University. Had a stint with the Chicago Bears, was cut, ended up playing for the Buffalo Bills this past season, and got in, I believe, 13 games. So he's a guy who I don't think played a ton on defense, but got opportunities to play on special teams. And he did play games in the NFL. So it's kind of going to be, again, usually when guys play games, even if they don't make their respective teams, then they get opportunities with other teams that might have that might not have necessarily the same depth. But you're talking about a guy who over the last 2 seasons in 2022 and 2023 has played 19 NFL games. So that's a lot of action to see. So if he's got NFL tape, so if he does get cut, it's not guaranteed that another team wouldn't pick him up, but played 5 games for the Chicago Bears in 2022, played 1 game for the Bills in 2022 after being cut by Chicago, and then last year played 13 games, made 3 tackles, 2 assisted tackles. Uh, and so yeah, was a guy who played regularly, played 13 of the 17 games for the Buffalo Bills. So that's a guy again that if he does come, and again, I mean, he could be a difference maker from a global standpoint. As of right now, teams are only forced to dress one global player. The Alouettes have a great one in Joseph Zima, but you could in theory add a Kingsley Jonathan, and he could be part of that rotation at defensive end, and you would have a second global, which just goes to show what the type of depth that they've built up there. So I don't know if you'll see Kingsley Jonathan this year. I wouldn't bet on it, but it would still kind of be interesting to see uh, where he falls if he doesn't make it. But I do think that he has an opportunity to stick in the NFL. He's only 25 years old. He's 6'4", 260, like I said, from Syracuse University. He's from Lagos, Nigeria. So he's a guy who could make a difference in the CFL and in the NFL. He's definitely building up a nice little career for himself. So we'll see. Signed the new contract. He signed a reserve future contract with the Bills in January 2023. Yeah, and so like I said, played the majority of their games last season. It's funny. I remember the Alouettes having the first overall pick in the global draft, and the Hamilton Tiger Cats made a trade to get the second pick. And I remember being in the room when the draft was taking place because we were doing some behind the scenes content. And the Alouettes picked Kingsley Jonathan, and the Hamilton Tiger Cats second overall clearly didn't expect that. They took a timeout because I'm assuming what happened was that they thought that Montreal would take somebody else, and they really wanted Kingsley Jonathan, and they didn't end up getting him. So we'll see if he ever comes to Canada. Definitely intriguing size, skill, athleticism, but really good player out of Syracuse University. Is 10 career NFL tackles in total. Lastly, that's 5. Lastly, we have the second round pick in that same global draft, Thomas Odukoya, who's a 6'6", 253-pound tight end from Amsterdam, from the Netherlands. A guy who went to Eastern Michigan University, was undrafted in the NFL, did sign a free agent contract with the Tennessee Titans. Spent most of his time on the practice roster. I believe he spent all of his time on the practice roster. And yeah, stuck around. I remember last year just doing a little research on him. Mike Vrabel, who was the coach back then in training camp in 2023 for the Titans, had made comments to the fact that they really liked what they had seen from him. Was a really nice find, but did spend the majority of his time on the practice roster, and was signed again in January to a futures contract. So he will be going to training camp with the Tennessee Titans. We'll see if he sticks. But they kept him around in 2022. They kept him around in 2023, so they very much feel strongly about him. I know that in the CFL, they don't necessarily utilize tight ends in the same way that they do in the NFL. I know there's a lot more fullback play in the CFL, but I mean, when you have a guy this talented, that size, with the experience he has, I mean, if the NFL's taking notice and you can get him, then you find a way. And I'm not worried with the coaching staff the Alouettes have. You find a way to integrate this guy into your team, into your offense. So those are the 6 players that I'm looking at. Thomas Odukoya is the last one. That's 6 of 6. So there's 6 players that the Alouettes own. 6 NFL players the Alouettes own the exclusive rights to over the National Football League right now. So it'll be interesting to see if any one of those guys shows up. I mean, potentially Montreal can get 1, 2, 3. Maybe as many as 4 out of the 6 to come back. I think with Chase Brown, that's an extreme long shot. The rest, I think they're all a little bit more realistic, some more than others. And maybe Kingsley Jonathan, not necessarily realistic either, because he's played so many games in the league. So he might wait it out, even if he does get cut. You'll wait for an NFL opportunity, I would think. But it's just nice to keep tabs on these guys because they're really good players. And it would be nice to see them come to Montreal at some point, but there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. All right. As we continue to move forward with the podcast, it's time to have our next guest. He is the receivers coach with the Montreal Alouettes. He's Mike Lionello. Mike, what's going on, man?
Hey, not much. Just here, back in Montreal. Very nice to be back. First time back since the Grey Cup, so it's been awesome.
All right, so talk to me about your offseason. I know you're out on the West Coast. Just talk to me about what you've been doing, what you've been up to.
New apartment, which has been awesome in Vancouver, so I can't complain. Otherwise, took some time off, and then you're back at it, researching, studying what we can do better, what we can change, all that kind of thing.
So this week, can you give me kind of a behind-the-scenes portrait of 100%. Kind of what's going on and why you guys are all together and the type of meetings you guys are having?
The biggest thing is being able to watch the film together. Because when you're on Zoom, the film lags, but the vibe is, it's not that it's bad, but it's just not the same. It's being in person, being able to shoot ideas off each other, being like, oh, hey, I see that, or I see this, or we could do this, or hey, put this other clip up and do this. Whereas when you're on Zoom, it's so much harder to do, and it's not the same. So
is it? Sorry, is it regular season tape, like playoff, like 2023 tape? You're talking about
2023 tape, yeah. So you want to watch everything we did. So everything we did from preseason game 1 through the Grey Cup, we watched.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you what's going to be different offensively, but if you had to put a percentage on how much of what you guys are installing is the same and different, like what would you say the percentages of new stuff that you guys are going to have?
Maybe 10 to 20%. But it's how can we use the stuff we already have differently? Right. How can you move pieces elsewhere? How can you move concepts to different spots? How can you do a different concept? Maybe slightly differently, but it's the same thing. So it's all adjustments off what you got. If you try and do too much, you're hurting yourself. So less is more, but do it well and do it differently. So
this is year 3 for you, right? Montreal, 4?
Technically 5 if you include COVID.
Okay, well, I'm talking about now. Yeah. I mean, we're the same age, so I think you're really young. But can you just carry me through like your journey of how you got here and where you've been and what you're up to?
It was wild. So it was 3 years at Simon Fraser University in BC, and then 3 years with the Lions, and then a year with Toronto, and then technically the COVID year here. When Kahari got hired, I worked with him in BC,
right,
and he brought me on here.
Right.
So, no, it's been a ride.
Football-wise, like you're like, did you play at all growing up?
I played 1 year of high school football. That
was it?
Just grade 12. Yeah, only year. And
receiver
and corner, and tiny, like 5'9", 100.
Two-way player.
Oh yeah,
you're Deion Sanders
at 5'9", 135 pounds. But I wasn't even going to play. I transferred schools, but I transferred for basketball. And then somebody who lived close to me just happened to be going to the football training camp in August. I was like, fuck it, I'll tag along.
So, okay, I'm curious, what did you learn last year with that training camp? Because, like, you guys had a lot of openings at wide receiver. I'm just curious what you learned from training camp 2023.
The biggest thing, not necessarily that I learned that year, but when you learn being in the league for 8 years now, whatever, is you never know who's going to be a player. Right. You absolutely never know. You can watch the tape. This guy went to USC. This guy went to, say, Richmond University. You never know until you get out there because you don't know how they think, you don't know how they react, and you don't know how they process information. And they can be the best athlete in the world, but if they can't process information on the fly, they can't play. Yeah. And we had over 20 guys. I remember after those first 2 practice days, with the 20, 22, 20, however many guys it was, my mind was like, oh my God. Because you got one coach for 20-some-odd guys, and you're answering questions left, right. But it was worth it. Yeah. To find Austin Mack and Tyler Snead. And it's pretty incredible. And it speaks to the scouting side and bringing those guys in. But when you look at those very first depth charts, Snead is the 4th Z. Oh, yeah. The 4th Z. That's as far down as you can get. Oh, yeah. And Austin's the 4th X. But it goes to show you just never know until you get out on the field.
I'm curious, did you have a moment in camp for both those 2 guys in particular where you were like, okay, we got something here?
So Austin's is easy. Austin's was a scrimmage when he made the catch over Ruffin.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget this. So the PA announcer called his name wrong. He said Austin Mark. And I went right up to him like, they will never mess your name up again from this very moment. And they never did. And so that was the clear moment for him. With Snead, it was just his consistency. In practice getting open. Like our best cover guy, Wes Sutton, struggled with him in one-on-ones, which is rare. Yeah. Like the only other guy I've ever seen Wes struggle with is Reggie. Yeah. But when you're a rookie and you can beat Wesley Sutton in man-to-man coverage consistently, you know he can do something. But with Snead, it was our fault not getting him on the field earlier. Okay. And it was a great case of the practice film was amazing. his mind was amazing. But when he got into the preseason game against Ottawa, he didn't necessarily have his best game. But what we forgot to realize is Cody wasn't playing. And that connection was with Cody. And Cody had been the one throwing to him in practice, not Davis, not Caleb. And we let that cloud our judgment, and that'll never happen again.
So how do you? I mean, I guess you don't replace him, but is it by committee replacing Mac? How do you do it?
It is, and Tevin will be here, and Reggie will be here, and it'll be a competition for the spot. But the thing we realized, the Winnipeg game in Winnipeg, is the ball can't go through just one guy. Austin Mack can't be the primary target on every play. And what you also saw in that game was Snead getting open. You saw Tyson getting open. So from that game on, it became okay, we can't just target Austin. The targets are going everywhere. He'll still be the primary target, but we have other guys that can do amazing things too. So it's by committee, but it's also finding who's that next X. Yeah. Like when
do you have any other 5'4" receivers?
No, not quite. There's a 5'8" guy though. But when we lost Gino, it was
maybe Cole Caulfield can catch passes.
He might be able to. He's athletic now. He's athletic.
This is just for the podcast. Don't worry about it. It's not important or anything. You're okay.
But when we lost Gino, the question was, who's going to replace Gino?
Yeah.
And thankfully we found Austin. Yeah. So it's who's that next guy up?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it'll be. I think obviously this camp will play itself out, and you said the tape can only tell you so much, right? But I'm curious. Did you when you saw Reggie White? Because like at the end of the season, we saw Reggie White. You mentioned Reggie, and Reggie looked pretty good in practice. Like he slimmed down a little bit, and he looked good. Like what did you see down the stretch?
You saw a guy who was getting more comfortable with the knee, and like when he first got out there, you could tell and rightfully so that was a massive knee injury, but just how he progressed week over week over week, and then he made one catch on scout team where it was the old Reggie White. It was that seam ball. He went up in the air, caught it, came down confident, and when you saw that, you're like, okay, Reggie's back. And Reggie was a phenomenal player when he was playing, and when that injury happened, he was taking off. That's the saddest part to me. So I hope we get out there in camp and he's Reggie White, which I'm sure he will be.
Can you just give me the scouting report, Tevin Jones, what you see, what you like?
Tevin's a man amongst boys at times. Like he's 6'3", he's 215 pounds, he runs a 4.5. It's just if he's playing with confidence, he dominates. When that confidence goes away, and rightfully so, you're not going to play the same way. So it's my job to give him that confidence to go out there and dominate like he can. So.
You talked about watching the tape. I'm curious, is there anything you saw in the Grey Cup or in the East Final when you rewatched it that you maybe didn't realize in the moment, something you had an appreciation for after the fact?
Ooh, I'm trying to think. The last play, it was designed for Snead, but Tyson was the cover zero throw. Snead won on the route, but nobody's looking over there because everybody's celebrating with Tyson. Yeah. And then, but looking back, my favorite thing to watch in the Grey Cup is the sideline. And watching the sideline react to different things. And, like, I'll never forget, you guys posted on Instagram after Cole's touchdown. And there's Cole and I celebrating together. I'm like, yes! Like, just it's those moments that in the moment you don't realize are happening because it's adrenaline and you're reacting on the fly. But just to watch it back is like, oh, my God, that's so cool. And even yesterday, Noel was like, Mike, you should have seen your celebration on something the wall did. So I want to go back and see how it all happened.
Yeah,
so
I thought the cool moment for me after the fact was, I think, Jason hugged his son, and then he hugged Antwi, and then you came in the picture and you jumped out. Like those, you guys are usually like you're laid back, but you're pretty businesslike at practice and stuff. So to see that kind of all come out and the hard work, it was special to watch you guys do that from a distance.
And it happened 2 times. So my other favorite one besides that one is the Saskatchewan game when Jason got back at them, and it just having that moment with him was amazing. And then it's funny because the RDS feed caught it, but the TSN feed didn't. But it's still just, regardless of what was shown on TV, it was such a special moment. We'll all never forget it. That's the nice thing. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate you, man.
That's Mike Lionello, receivers coach with the Montreal Alouettes. All right, that's all the time that we have for today on the PodcAls. The English version, I remind you, comes out every Tuesday. And the French version is available every Thursday. And just a reminder, if you are bilingual, don't think that the podcasts are the same. They're very different. We don't necessarily talk about the same things in the English one that we do in the French one. So if you're bilingual, then you have an opportunity to double up your Alouettes content for the week. Please be sure to sign up to the podcast wherever you get it, wherever you listen to it, whether it's Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcast. Please subscribe. Give us a positive rating. We would certainly appreciate it. And that's pretty much it. Can't wait to see you guys at training camp in Saint Jerome. Can't wait to see you guys at Percival Molson Stadium. It's springtime. We're getting closer to football time. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.